Hey guys, it's Leah Eridil here with a quick summoner guide. So just kind of a quick disclaimer, I've never made a guide before, so I don't really have any structure to this at all. And I might talk too fast, so I'm going to probably put some annotations in to kind of explain stuff. To further prove that I'm kind of new to making guides, when I recorded this video I forgot to turn the game sounds off, so I now have to basically say everything I said all over again as a result, because I now have to annotate it over Vegas. So starting with abilities, we'll have a look at what's instant, what isn't, and very briefly as to what each ability does. Ruin is our main filler, so we're going to be using this every single time we're not in Dreadworm Trance. When you go into Dreadworm Trance, this turns into Ruin 4, which has to be hard casted. When you're not in Dreadworm Trance, you can just spam this all the time once your dots are up. It's good damage and it provides the best casting ability. Then of course you've got Bio 2, which is a dot that basically just deals damage over time. It doesn't have anything special to it, it's just additional pressure, and you need to have both that and Miasma 3 up to get a full damage Fester off. Then of course Miasma 3, this is one of our best dot abilities and best abilities in general for one pure reason: it adds so much pressure. So this is generally the first dot you're always going to pull up on everything. At the start of the games I like to multi-dot as many targets as possible with Miasma 3 to add pressure. This reduces the amount of healing someone takes by 10%. So where healer's got a 10% healing nerf, and this on top of that also reduces the healing again by 10%, you can just do crazy pressure with this. It's so good. Next we have Wither. Wither replaced Tri-Bind, which in my opinion wasn't originally a good change because it took away the only CC we had. So we got Wither instead of Tri-Bind now, and this is a really good ability because what it actually does is it's a conal cleave, so it's more pressure if you can hit loads of people with it, and it also does 1000 potency instantly, whereas before Tri-Bind did 1000 potency but had to be hard casted and it was a real long cast. You almost never did burst with Tri-Bind in it, so this is why I really like Wither, and it's a good change in my opinion. You'll want to use this with every kind of like fourth burst window, as it's a minute cooldown. You can burst more or less every 15 seconds. Next up is Aether Flow. Functions the exact same in PvP as it does in PvE. You cast it, you get 3 stacks. The stacks are consumed by Energy Drain and Fester. When you use Energy Drain or Fester, it reduces the cooldown on Aether Flow, same as it does in PvE. Next is Energy Drain, which got nerfed last season from 1000 potency to 750, but this has largely been offset by the changes to Wither to some extent. Energy Drain, again, it functions the same in PvP as it does in PvE. You cast it, you get HP and mana back. Generally, you use this for burst, not to heal yourself, but if you've got Aether Flow stacks and you're being focused, consider using it as some kind of self-sustain since you don't really have anything else. It's better to gimp your next burst window than it is for you to basically die and have no burst window at all, especially if you've just casted Aether Flow. I was trying to remember why I clicked that originally. Obviously one thing to mention as well is that we have far less HP than we used to, which is why I've taken the trait. So yeah, kind of any kind of sustain you can get, use it, but don't use it just sort of, oh, I've lost 2k HP, I'm going to cast Energy Drain. Next up is Fester. Again, you'll want to cast this when both your dots are up and you're doing massive burst. It's a very strong single target ability, but it relies on both your dots to be active to get the most out of it. So the same as it is in PvE basically. And then we have our burst best friend, which is Dreadworm Trance. This isn't as strong as it used to be in Heaven's Ward, but it still is very powerful for the simple reason is that you get Death Flare from it, and Death Flare leads to your Bahamut burst. So if you can cast dots during Dreadworm Trance, only do this when you've had to use Trance because you've held onto it for too long, as opposed to you're doing burst. Generally when you go into Dreadworm Trance, you're casting Death Flare almost immediately. One important thing to mention is your Ruin 3 becomes a hard cast of Ruin 4 in Dreadworm Trance, so if you're forced to Trance and your melee DPS does a countdown, hard cast a Ruin 4 into a Dreadworm Trance. It's probably the best chance of a burst you're going to get. And then of course you can Aether Flow, Fester, Energy Drain, and Archmorn with your Bahamut. So this is probably one of our strongest abilities, and you'll want to obviously use this as often as possible. but you'll want to use it still sensibly at the same time. So of course summon Bahamut, which comes directly after your Dead Room chance. One difference between this and the PvE version is that you have to be in Dread Room trance twice to get this in PvE, whereas in PvP it's after every single trance cycle. So it'll be trance, Bahamut burst, trance burst, Bahamut burst. So you'll keep cycling between the two over and over again. And of course next comes our limit break ability, Cometeor. What this does is it applies another, what I call Mortal Strike effect to everything it hits. I guess that's kind of a WoW reference. It basically means they'll take reduced healing. So this has become a bit of a nuisance to use now since we no longer have Tribind, but luckily the changes to Crystal Town mean there's a lot of narrow chokes where you can cast this. If you don't know when else to cast it on the Wolf's Heart box, but try and catch as many people with it as possible, because you can force a tank LB or a healer bit LB every single time you use this, which is usually tops twice per game. The damage from it isn't fantastic, but it can be relatively strong in the long term because of the effect that it gives and because of what you can force a healer or a tank to use every time you cast this. So as mentioned before, obviously this is all like your stuff that will basically be unable to be bound to an action bar, because the certain abilities in your action bar will change into these when you do certain things. So for example, Dreadman Chance turns your Ruin 3 into a hard casted Ruin 4. Dreadman Chance button itself becomes Death Flare. All your Bahamut stuff is on one button. Also my Fenrir Pup Sword, just throwing it out there. So obviously once you've summoned Bahamut, you then press the same button again if you want to cast Arkmorn. I still don't really understand the difference between Enkindle, Bahamut and Arkmorn. All I know is when I want to cast Arkmorn, I just spam the button over and over again. By the way, Arkmorn is literally the most unreliable ability in the game. It's basically another Death Flare, but there's so many annoying limitations to it. For example, your Bahamut must be in line of sight from the target you're on, and you must be in line of sight of Bahamut, and sometimes you'll cast it, you'll move one square and it just cancels. It can be a really frustrating ability to use, so it's not the most reliable, but when it lands when you actually want it to land, something will die or something strong like Benediction will get used, because the damage is insane if it goes off, which happens. Recently I've kind of played with it a bit more and gotten more used to it, but generally it doesn't go off when I want it to. Worm Wave is basically every single time you do damage with Bahamut out, Worm Wave gets casted by Bahamut, so you can spam like Ruin 3 and it will cast the Worm Wave with it, so it basically turns your Ruin 3 into a 1250 potency ability. So as some of you may or may not know, PvP ranked abilities are no longer a thing. You now have all your abilities here, you get them automatically, and they all are sort of interchangeable as the game goes on. The same with the traits as well. You no longer have, to get 48 rank in PvP to get as many traits as possible. Obviously Sprint became Bolt and things like that. Recuperate changed from Season 7, it was a 30-second cooldown, it's now 45. You've obviously got everything else more or less does the same thing. Muse recovers a quarter of your HP, Recuperate recovers a quarter of your HP, 11 recovers half of your TP if you're like me and forget it's on until like gold tier. Yeah, it's quite useful. Kappa. Purify was good back when CC lasted longer. It no longer lasts long enough for you to warrant taking the spell. Healers will occasionally take it from the cells, but that's about it. Generally you won't take Purify anymore, it's just not that great. If you want to avoid CC, you'll take something like Concentrate instead. So Concentrate basically gives you like a little CC immunity, which on a really short cooldown. I tend to take this really often when I'm in light party, because Summoner gets focused a lot more, and generally if you stun or silence a Summoner every 10 to 20 seconds, guaranteed you're going to block me from doing a burst or something. So I take Concentrate in light party, but on ladder it really depends. If I know it's a tank that doesn't pay much attention to the caster, I can ignore it and take something really aggressive like Muse. But otherwise, if I'm not sure, play Concentrate, because it's a guaranteed defensive, even though it does require a little bit of foresight to use correctly. Safeguard is a no-brainer. It's what I like to call a shield wall. Again, these are all like really weird WoW terms. It reduces the damage you're taking 25%. Remember, we don't have any escapes as summoner, and we don't even have Tribind anymore. So, no matter what else you take, I'd say you should always have Safeguard, purely for that reason. Bolt is obviously the original sprint in return, but with a shorter cooldown. It's another defensive. It's good for kiting as well and getting away. So if you want to play really defensive, for example, you could take Bolt Safeguard or Bolt Concentrate or something like that. But since Safeguard is so much of a staple, you should take it. Recuperate isn't as strong as it used to be, and Muse is something you should only really ever take when you want to play like super fucking aggressive. The reason I say this is because they changed the user interface now, so you can see what additionals the other people in the other team have taken. So if you see a summon that's playing with Muse, you're probably going to want to kill them repeatedly early and over again, because they're so easy exploitable. Same way, even though they haven't got Concentrate, you can sit on them all game and they can't cast anything. So yeah, that frame change has been quite a nuisance really, and I don't know how much people take advantage of it going into Season 8. But yeah, Safeguard's a staple. Make sure you generally always have it. Don't take Recuperate, it's not that great for us. It's not really that great for, well, anyone, to be honest with you. I suppose it's okay for tanks where the sustain keeps them alive a bit more. But the thing about Safeguard is that it can be used proactively, so you can lower damage from like LB and burst from it when you know it's coming. Recuperate has to be used afterwards, by then you could already be dead. And Muse is your aggressive pick. It's pretty much the only aggressive pick in the additionals. So traits are something that's a bit harder to explain because these change basically almost every single game I play. I mean, there are some staples that I might use for several games in a row, but again, there's certain games where I might say, you know what, I might need to play a bit more defensive, or I might need to play a bit more aggressive, I need to swap this, or I know how this player is going to play, I know they'll let me sit at the back of the map and cast on everyone, so I can take MP regen, but for example, Recuperate and reduced damage taken both got nerfed in Season 8, so Recuperate's now 45-second cooldown instead of 30, and decreased damage taken now only covers 3% instead of 5, so I don't really take those at the moment until I've seen better evidence to suggest otherwise. Increased MP regen is me being a retard, by the way. I take it because I play super aggressive, so give me more mana, basically. I don't think any other summoner really takes it, unless Fever Pitch proves me wrong. And then other than that, I pretty much always take the damage option, HP option, because our HP is really, really low, it's 12,000. And the extra 500, you know, is just welcome really. It's another 500 health when I'm maxed out, can't really argue with it. Can't put Vitality accessories everywhere anymore. The other two aggressive options are increased action speed, which basically is lower cast time, lower cooldowns. Again, don't really take this much because the benefit is over an entire game as opposed to immediate. So, you know, it's great that it reduces 0.02 seconds and it works out to about 20 seconds by the end of the game, but I need those 20 seconds now. Decreased recast time is a better option defensively in my opinion than increased damage taken, because it lowers the cooldown and Concentrate, Bolt, well, all of your additional actions really, so, but especially the defensive ones. As far as increased healing potency goes, yeah, I mean, I guess sure, if you want like an extra 5% your energy drain. Yeah, I'm memeing by the way, don't actually ever do that. If I see any summoner playing with increased healing potency because of that, I will be most displeased. Increased resistance duration is, in my opinion, one of the strongest defensive traits. It's so overpowered actually. If a tank sits on a caster game, which is quite common, especially with black mages, this basically increases the amount of time it takes before they can silence you again or stun you again. So if you find yourself getting into Blood Spiller and then Low Blow, or like Holy Spirit stun, for example, this is really good ability to have because it will give you more freedom throughout the game. It's also a nice alternative to overtaking concentration, for example. Rather than concentration, I might choose to take increased resistance instead. TP regen, useless, obviously, don't take it. Right, so we're nearly there. We're going to go over sort of things like action bars and what you should have on them and where and why I have certain things in certain places. And then we're going to go over like your burst rotation as well. One important thing I like to note is keybind everything. For example, there you can see I'm spamming my fallback command whilst I'm moving, which is obviously better than trying to coordinate yourself walking whilst clicking with a mouse. Obviously, I'm aware this is a lot different for PS4 users that will generally, well, they only have the option of using stuff on their gamepads anyway, unless they plug in a keyboard and mouse. So yeah, whilst they're used to having everything bound, PC players obviously don't have that same limitation. And as you can see, life is a lot quicker when you can sort of, you know, cast whilst moving and using your abilities. I see people using arrow keys sometimes to turn whilst clicking spells on their action bars. It's really crazy. Also, you're not a real OG if you do not have tri-bind on your bars. Yeah, keybind everything. So for example, I have Wolf's Heart down here because I like to cast this 5 seconds before the box spawns. Tell people that it's almost up. Then there's like some other things I already have on this top row. Obviously my mouse isn't mimicking where I'm really going with this because this was recorded with commentary at first and I lost the commentary, but whatever. Get medals in case the tank is, I don't know, brain dead or something. Hello has become the universal standard term for I'm ready to burst, by the way. I feel like adrenaline rush ready is really overlooked. If, for example, somebody says they're ready to burst and you respond with adrenaline rush, it means you're planning to cometeor then, or whatever adrenaline rush you have, over their next burst window. Now, for example, some melees like Lloyd, I noticed when I was playing Bard, if he said adrenaline rush ready and then I said it, or he'd say hello and then I say adrenaline rush, it would mean that we had this kind of understanding that we were going to limit break at the same time. It's one of the most gratifying things to get off this game and almost always guarantees a kill on almost anything that isn't the tank. So make full use of this because I don't feel people use this as range nearly as much as they could. And even if you're going to limit break the box, just say you're going to do it. Communication's really important in Feast, especially since we're so limited to how much of it we can do. It's good to communicate as much as you can. As far as the sort of the bottom two rows go, which are my actual casting abilities, make from this what you will. I double them up. A, it's an OCD habit that I brought over from World of Warcraft, and B, because I like to have as much sort of vision of my cooldowns as possible, which really means I should have more safeguards around my bars and stuff. But having stuff like miasma there is just like kind of pointless, and it's just, well, blind obedience to OCD. But I like to be able to have good vision on my cooldowns, and you should as well, so make sure your bars are somewhere you can see them clearly. Right, so openers. I like to open fast, and I like to open very aggressively. Hence why I take Muse and increase regen. Miasma, you'll want to get this up on pretty much everything at the start of the game. It's good spread pressure, and it applies the debuff to everything. It's also worth mentioning, let's say your melee wants to go for a hard swap, then you only have to place bio on the target instead of having to cast miasma bio instead. So gives you more time to and more leeway sort of in obeying their burst windows. So you miasma bio your main target and then you miasma basically everything else. So I'll sort of try and give you a quick example. You got miasma bio, shove miasma on that. And then, so you're hitting this, and you know you switch his targets over. He wants to go healer instead. You just put bio up, and then obviously you can cast your Aetherflow abilities, and you can basically then go into your Dread Room trance and deflate the shit out of it. And then obviously once you've got your 3 stacks, you cast a Ruin, and you go into Dread Room trance. You cast your Death Flare, and then you basically get ready for your Bahamut burst, which is the same thing, but with Akmorn instead of Death Flare. So you should have your second Aetherflow ready, especially if you Aetherflowed before the game started, which you should always do, because then it's off cooldown when you need it. You cast your Aether abilities, Akmorn, get your Worm Waves off as much as you can, just keep doing as much pressure as possible. Alright, so one of the last things I'm going to show you is just a couple of little tips and tricks, because they're really useful to learn. They'll increase your skill cap quite quickly. Make sure I actually got enough markers to do what I want to do. I think I'm going to have to delete and reuse these whilst I'm doing it. So I'm just going to show you like basic timings, things like that. So just remember that you spawn here, the opposite team spawns there, because the queues take too long to do, so I'm just going to do it like this. So Wolf's Heart will always spawn where C is. I tend to go off the clock when it comes to time remaining, as opposed to how long the game's already gone on for. So when the clock hits 3 minutes remaining, the Wolf's Heart box will spawn. Fucking hell, I can't even talk. And you'll want to make sure you're positioned somewhere close to it 15 seconds prior to that, and you'll want to use your Wolf's Heart Ready macro to tell people that it's spawning soon. It's a lot easier to notice timings as a range than it is as a melee. And I used to always get frustrated with melee's missing timings, like on boxes for Wolf's Heart and Adrenaline, because I was so used to them, basically, you know, I was so used to be able to do it so easily, and then I played the melee once and realised it's actually really hard because you're focusing on not dying. So you've got Adrenaline boxes that will spawn here and here. So where these two markers are, the first set spawns at 4 minutes 30, so you want to use your macro a little bit before that. And obviously, why do I not have an Adrenaline Ready button on my bars? It's actually really bad and really bronze of me. Yeah, so you want to use your macro to say the box is going to spawn soon, and your obviously full objective is to get both, but if you don't think you're going to get both, get one. Get any of them, like just pick the one that you'd most like to get and be ready to burst it out. Don't like Jevon chance it or anything like that. A bit of Ruin 3 spam and Energy Drain should be enough to get one. At 1 minute 30, the second set spawns, and they will spawn. So remember that I showed you the ends being relative to bases. So obviously outside your base one will spawn, outside their base one will spawn, like directly in front of it, so not on the walls like the last two were. 1 minute 30 these spawn, and arguably these are more important than the first ones, because if you're ahead, these are going to be the ones that will give you another tank limit break or another healer limit break. If you're behind, these could give you the melee limit break that might end the game. The general etiquette is you take one and your melee DPS takes one for the first boxes. If you only get one, your melee DPS gets priority because melee limit break is strong as frick. And in culling time, they can kill stuff with just limit break on its own. So your limit break isn't as good as theirs, is what I'm trying to say. You are dirt trash when it comes to cometeor, so your priority limit break goes to melee for damage. For the second set, if you're looking to go defensive, let your healer and tank fight it out for it. If your melee takes one anyway, it's whatever, but try not to take any of the second set. Even if Southern Time's going to be due, it's just so much better to have the tank limit break or the healer limit break. I'd say to some extent I've mostly covered everything. This guide is literally twice as long as I wanted it to be, and was an absolute pain in the ass to make because I recorded it and then I made the rookie mistake of talking over it in real time whilst recording it, and then finding out my game sounds were still on, so you couldn't actually hear me. So I basically had to do this entire guide spoken over a video I'd already taken, where the mouse movements and everything were done relative to whilst I was talking, which is why some parts of this won't make sense. And therefore I do obviously implore you to give me feedback either on the YouTube video itself or on the thread on PvP forums. If you want to find me personally, I can be found on Discord, so the name for that should be on the screen any moment now. That's the best place to find me, or in Syracuse Discord, which is a pre-made Discord for 4v4. I used to be in Wolfpuck's Den, I can't currently be found in there at the moment, so PM is private message is basically the best way to get me, or on the forums. If you post on forums, I will see it. I check them almost every day. Other than that, thanks for watching and good luck, have fun in Season 8.